All right. But hit record, and the public is in, so you can begin whenever you like.
Okay, what is it, afternoon? Good afternoon. This is, I'm Bernard Green, Chair of the Brookline Select Board, and this is a meeting of the Expenditure and Revenues Study Committee for November 21st, 2025. Let's start off with following the roll. Charlie, could you do that? Because I don't have access to a screen.
Sure.
Looks like more people are coming. You might want to wait a minute or so. I
Just saw Jeff Rudolph.
Yeah, and Dick is here now. I don't know if he was before.
Yeah, he was on before.
Oh,
We
I guess he just wasn't showing.
Okay. Let me go down the list then. Dick Benka. Here. Ruth Allen Fitch.
Here.
Jeff, I'm promoting you now, so I'll give you a second.
I'm here.
Sergio.
Present.
Janet Gelbart.
Here.
Sadaf.
Here.
Mariah Nobrega. Don't see Mariah yet. John Doggett. Don't see John yet. John Van Scoyoc.
He's in Morocco.
And then, yes, Jesse Hefter, not here yet. And Cliff Brown.
Here.
Thank you.
I'm here too, Charlie.
And Bernard Green. And then we'll do Jeff Rudolph now that he's on camera.
And John Doggett just joined.
I'm here, Jeff Rudolph here.
Sorry, I didn't see that. Okay, and John Doggett
Hi.
here. Okay.
Okay, so let's get going. First item is update from school administrative staff. Are they here?
They're not, but I spoke to Bella Long about this, the superintendent about this week, and I know Val has also spoken to her and Mariah. We've all spoken to each other on this. So the update I have on the school side, and Val, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that as of December 3rd, the school administration has made a commitment to get to this committee a projection of the overall ask for any potential or a projection of the potential deficit they face, including once deficiencies have been identified. So that is to say, they have already given us gross revenue projections over the last, without taking into account any efficiencies or changes for the last 5 years. We have that information from the schools now. What they are now working on is figuring out where they can make reductions or combinations in services to get to a bottom line number. So they will get that. Their commitment is to get that to this committee by December 3rd. It's not going to be the full budget. It's not going to be line item by line item, but it's going to be a discussion of, generally what it is that they're going to be doing in order to hit those targets. And then they will be prepared to come to the committee the following week. That is also the week that the select board is meeting to talk about the forecast. So we will be able to have a substantive discussion about the forecast with both a clearer picture on the schools and on the town side, with the select board, the advisory committee, anyone else on that front. And then this committee will meet at some point, hopefully later that week. The select board is meeting Tuesday the 9th. This committee, we will try and find time for the full committee to meet later that week. And in advance of that, the school administration has asked that the individual committee members take a look at what will be provided in the 3rd and submit any questions they may have in advance, so that as much as possible, the school team can come prepared to answer some questions. Although obviously knowing that's about a little over a week's turnaround. We want to be mindful of everyone's time, but that's the current proposed schedule. Once that is completed, then we talk about kind of moving forward and drilling into the details a little bit, which will be easier because both schools and the town will then, by that point, be pretty much enmeshed in putting the budget books together. We will have much clearer pictures as December and January go on of where all our line items are lining up. On the town side, we've discussed with the town subcommittee where we are, we've made some revisions based on what we're seeing in terms of revenues and where we've been able to identify sources of funding. I have another revision to that document that I will be circulating at the start of next week. The town's gap is still around, is around $3.1 million currently. That's down from 3.6, which is good. We have identified sources of revenue and efficiencies to close a significant portion of that gap. I think in terms of being able to provide a narrative for what we are doing proactively, in addition to seeking funds elsewhere, that we should be in pretty good shape to continue to assist the town subcommittee in preparing its report. So that's the update there. Val, is there anything you wanted to add on that front?
No, that sounds about right. The efficiencies and some of the reductions will be discussed at school committee, I believe, on December 4th at our meeting, and then looking at the week of December 8th and 15th for Bella to come in to this committee.
So I just wanted to clarify something that you said, Chaz. You said something about sending questions in advance to the school admin team. I just want to make sure what the request is and when we're being asked to submit what by, so I can make sure that our school subcommittee does that.
Sure. So they're going to get, if the initial information is going to come to you and the school committee on December 3rd. And then the next meeting of the full NRSC will be the week of the 8th, the week of December 8th. But I would say it's going to be after the 9th. So it will be, depending on people's availability, either the 10th, the 11th, or the 12th. So I would suggest, if the subcommittee wants to meet before then to talk about hashing out some questions in detail or having some discussions on that front, maybe meeting either on Friday the 5th or Monday the 8th to discuss, and then gives you enough time to submit those questions in advance and schools time to do some digging to respond.
Chaz, Jesse here. I thought Bella told me that she was preparing to have the numbers first at school committee on the 4th. You keep mentioning the 3rd. Is that hoping to get it one day earlier or what?
My understanding was that that's their target for getting it done so that it can
It's
be.
my fault that I kept saying the 3rd. It's supposed to be the 4th. That's my fault for just saying the wrong day of the week and putting it in Chaz's
Got it.
head.
Yeah,
Apologies, Chaz.
okay, thanks, Mark. Yeah, I thought that Bella had told me it was going to be, we'd see it first on the 4th at school committee. I'm not sure how far in advance of that evening at 6 o'clock we'll see it, but that she wanted to show it to us first, and then it could be then distributed or presented on the 9th, which is the Tuesday afterwards, if that's when we're meeting again.
Okay, so we have a school just to round out this question that I had, Chaz, we have a school subcommittee meeting that we scheduled around Bella's calendar on Tuesday the 9th, I believe at 5 p.m. And the objective of that was for the schools group subcommittee to ask specific questions about the budget. I think we can compile it maybe ahead of time after we see the presentation on Thursday the 4th. But it sounds like you're planning to schedule a broader committee meeting that week as well. Is that right? In which case, we have two conversations on the budget, and maybe we want to streamline.
It's that was the plan, but I think so maybe you and I and the schools team can talk offline and figure out what's the efficient way to do that. Because I don't want to just duplicate the group's work. It may be that we then have that meeting on the 9th, and then the school subcommittee reports out.
Or other people can join that meeting, right? I mean, this is something that we already confirmed works for both Bella and for Susan Gibbons.
Right.
That was scheduled around their schedule to make sure that they were available for that.
That's great.
Okay.
Yeah, it'll be a long day for the select board, so I'm gonna figure out how that's going.
That's fair.
Can I ask a question? This is Ruth Ellen. The Thursday, 12/4, is there a meeting, a school committee meeting? What is that date?
That's the town subcommittee meeting?
Okay.
So I think school,
There's a school.
No, that's school committee meeting.
and I assume that members of the committee will tune into that and and download all the materials so that we have the report.
And
Yeah.
what time is it?
Our meetings usually start at 6 p.m., but they're always recorded, so you don't have to watch it live.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, anything else?
No updates, beyond that? No.
Yeah, so Ruth Ellen, just so that we're clear, our
Yeah.
town subcommittee is meeting that day also at 9 a.m.
Okay,
And then at 6 p.m. the same day, it'll be the school committee meeting in the evening. Both are recorded, so you can watch them later. But the thing is, when we meet on Thursday morning, December 4th, I will not have on the agenda to review the school's, newest number.
Right.
We won't know about it until the evening.
right, okay. Thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Sure.
May I make, this is Dick Benka, may I make a request that immediately after the school committee meeting on December 4th, you get out to members of this committee the link so that we can get into the recording quickly.
We can ask Betsy to send that out to ERC.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Please
I'll send her a
include
note
us.
now. Yeah, thank you.
But just as a follow-up, Betsy always posts them immediately after our meetings.
Yeah, I think Dick is asking for them to be sent directly to the committee.
To this committee,
Yeah.
the expense and
I
revenue.
don't mean to be lazy, but,
That's fine.
easier for us to.
Jesse, maybe she can just send it to Nicole and Nicole can. distribute.
I was starting that email already. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Just, it just makes life easier to track
Totally.
it down.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Taking care of it and be in the background right now. Okay.
Okay, unless there's anything else, let's move on to the next item, following up on data requests. Brookline Day budget.
Well, that was one of the ones, but I'll also just let you know, we have provided now to the town subcommittee a variety of information about comparable communities and the analysis that we've been doing there. That production is ongoing. That includes references to both union and non-union positions in terms of how payout is going there. I'm happy to provide that information to anyone on the committee who wants it. There are a couple of documents that are not public because of the sensitive information they contain, but most of the rest of them are public documents. So I'm happy to provide that to anyone from any of the other subcommittees that may want to look at that. We also just continue to revise. We also continue to produce other material responsive to subcommittee requests. We're going to take a look at FTEs over time, letting folks know the overall growth in staff and how that's shifted, both in terms of where we were pre-pandemic, where we were at the time of pandemic reductions in 2020, and where we are now, where that growth has been and why. Doing a little bit more of a deep dive on some of the stuff that Dick Benka brought to the committee's attention a while back. So we are continuing that analysis, and we would just ask that as the town subcommittee continues work, if there's overlap, if there's material that either the Futures of the School subcommittee needs that would be helpful, such as something on shared services and so forth, that you just flag it for us so that we can track that down sooner rather than later and get it to you. But generally speaking, the Brookline Day budget was a special request from a couple of committee members interested in how that works. For any other similar requests, please let us know because we're happy to provide that out.
Chaz, on the Brookline Day numbers, you had said, I think in the town subcommittee that you were using funds from the marathon,
Correct.
but I didn't notice that on the chart. So there was this is what it costs. This is what we fundraise. I assume the gap is what's coming.
The gap is what comes from the BAA. Yeah.
And the BAA, as I recall, was more than
Correct.
that funding.
Right. So we use the BAA's funding primarily, for the marathon. But as I pointed out, the marathon costs more than the BAA provides us. So just defrays that cost somewhat. And then we also then partial that money out so that we have money for Brookline Day to cover any sort of delta there. But that budget has actually been getting more efficient over the years, particularly since we've been able to seek out more sponsors and develop a rapport in Coolidge Corner there, where we're getting more vendors coming in. So trending in the right direction. could see the delta there that we feel is between $30,000 and $40,000. So there's not a significant cost to the town to run one day.
Okay, so that means that taxpayer dollars aren't being spent on face painting. Okay, well, I will. Final item on the agenda is a discussion of final report outline from the town administrator. Bev, do you want to talk about that? I assume everyone had a chance to go over it.
I apologize that I sent it out late. I sent it out to a couple of committee members just to get some initial feedback as well as to staff. I also circulated it to Bella just to make sure that on the school staff side, people have had a chance to review as well. This document is a draft. First and foremost, you can see in the top of it some good news, which is after talking with council, we have a little more time to get a ballot question on the ballot if there needs to be one. We have been operating that the assumption was 60 days. That assumption is for if you want to get on the ballot when there's a biennial state election, because of the extra time needed to get the state to sign off on it. If you're having a purely local election, the deadline is 35 days. So the deadline to submit ballot question to the town clerk's office is March 31st, 2026. So that gives this committee some extra time, not a lot. And so I still recommend that the work be completed no later than February 20th, which would get the select board ample time to review it, to hold its own public hearing, which the select board likes to do for issues like this, and to review the recommendations and have a conversation on where to go from there. So you can see I put a draft outline together. I'll put it up on the board here in 1 second.
I've got a question, Chad, before you get. I'm slightly confused about the intent on the timing of a possible ballot question for an override and its relationship to the town election date and the town meeting date. Can you just help me understand how that works? I thought that an override required an approval from town meeting. Am I wrong?
No, so to put a question on the ballot requires only approval of the select board.
Okay. Not to put it on the ballot, to pass it.
No, town meeting does not need to pass the override. Town meeting does need to approve a budget containing how the override funding would be obtained, would be spent.
So if following your thought that the ballot question gets up by the end of March, which is the legal deadline, when are you envisioning the actual vote to take place townwide?
Yeah, it would be a townwide vote on the first Tuesday in May, which is the date that the local elections are set, which is Tuesday, May 5th in 2026.
Got it. Okay. And so assuming whatever outcome that is, you're saying that the town meeting materials would have been prepared with this dual budget idea, either with or without the override.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So that
I just wanted to make sure I realize that there is if we were to push this back to end of March to finalize the question, I'm interested in hearing from people what that means in terms of the forums and the communication, the advocacy that usually happens around this. I know that legally you could push that date out. I just wanted to talk about the viability or the implication of pushing that date out and whether that gives, I don't know, the community enough time to have a conversation about it.
It's 5 weeks, basically, if I understand correctly, from April 1, basically, until May 5th, right?
Right. Which feels tight, but also perhaps you don't need the ballot question finalized and there's a different way to start the conversation, but maybe not because it's not clear then how it will be packaged. So this is a question for I don't know, for anybody who has an answer to this about whether that's enough time.
What has the timeline been in the past? It's not like this is our first override, so we've had experience.
We've had some experience with this. I will say that for the last override, the ballot question was finalized on the last possible day to do so. With
Would
that,
that make 30th or the earlier date that we thought?
you know, it was a 35, if I recall correctly, it was 36 days out. It was the last Tuesday before the deadline to do so. You transmitted that ballot question. With that said, the work of getting the number together had been done earlier. That work had been completed by the study committee in January of that year. The study working group, not a committee, in January of that year, and was presented as part of the initial budget presentations of both the town and the schools in February, early February. So there was a longer lead time in terms of when the numbers were locked and presented and when the select board officially signed off on. But that was the most recent override. I don't recall. I mean, I wasn't here for prior overrides. I'm not familiar. The other thing I will say is I was reading campaign finance literature. It is allowed to start campaigning for something prior to the ballot question being set. You just have to follow rules, the required rules about establishing a committee and, you know, state response and so forth. So in the event that individuals want to establish committees for or against a potential override question, they can do so before that question is finalized.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's a real question. Yeah. So. Okay, any other questions? Okay, Jazz.
So we have this, try to make this as big as I can for the folks in the room. We have a draft outline here, talking about the work and some timeline and some time to get the time for it to get done. Obviously, an executive summary should be done last. So, you know, whatever is when the other sections are completed. You know, the purpose here is really to create a concise summary of what is being recommended and why. And, you know, talk through summaries of the other 3 substantive sections of the document. Mariah has her hand up.
All right.
Thank you. And I just apologize. I mentioned in an email earlier, I have work obligations starting in a couple minutes, so I will have to drop off in about 5 minutes. But can I just ask a question? When were we told, if ever, that you were going to draft this outline? Because this was a surprise to me that there was an outline being circulated in advance as opposed to the subcommittees working on something. I just missed this whole thing if it was discussed.
I'm sorry, it was at the end of last week's meeting. The chair asked me to take basically an attempt at putting an outline together. But again, this is a draft. This is a document to work off of. This is not set in stone. I'm happy to, this is, you know, can be used, can be modified, can be thrown out, whatever is necessary. But based
Thank you for that clarification. I guess I had missed that, so I appreciate
My
that.
reason for suggesting this is to help us sort of organize our thoughts, all the various things that we're working on, into a format that you know would be most useful, the most persuasive, because we do have to persuade the voters one way or another. Janet.
When will we get the input from the Kennedy School? Because that talks to some of the issues in the summary.
So they are making their presentation to us in mid-December. And so we will have that information circulated to this group in 2 weeks' time.
And that would be addressing how much they think the town is willing to pay the voters and how to structure the override.
The structure of the override, priority to the voters. They are actually currently out in the field now with the survey. They're doing some work on that front. And they're trying to, you know, they're trying to be they're trying to get responses from the community about where the priorities are, reconfirming some of the stuff from the Polko study a year and a half ago, but also digging deep into more direct questions of, you know, what, you know, if are you know, not just are you excuse me, you know, not just, you know, what do you prioritize, but, you know, what are you willing to vote for?
And how are they doing that? Because I haven't seen any surveys cross my threshold.
So they, well, I don't know.
I can provide a quick update on this, Janet. They had hoped to get that survey out this week, but they have not had enough people sign up to take the survey, and they want to get to sort of critical mass before they send the survey out. They sort of don't want to rely on the responses to come in, so they're doing outreach now, and there should be a press release next week and a text out to a whole, I think it's going out to the TA newsletter. And the idea is to actually do the survey would actually go out, I believe, the first week of December, get the responses the end of that week, and would get us the results the following part of their final presentation. So so I guess keep an eye out for the press release early next week if you'd like to
I
participate.
just want to make sure you get stuff at the senior center and stuff on paper and pencil. Because a lot of those folks will not have access to a computer.
Yeah.
And if you put it out there, certainly if you tell Emily Williams, it will go out to all of the seniors who are on their mailing list. Also send it out to Brookline Kent. Same thing. They have extensive mailing lists, so they'll be reaching out to a large portion of the voters.
Okay, good. Mariah, you have your hand up again?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, and maybe this is a question for Sadaf, because the questions that are in the PSB section, I think I guess I'm confused about how they comply or comport with our work plan that we had outlined. And so I think it would be helpful if at our next meeting, we could like talk through what's here and what we are going to do and what we're not going to do and what is actually a PSB work product. Because some of the questions that are articulated in the PSB section below are really PSB work product and not the committee work product. So I guess I'm a little confused about how it all fits. And I hear you, Chaz, that like this is just a draft, but I just want to be making sure that we're clear on where the content is coming from and how we expect it to come together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is right. This is where I want the subcommittees and schools in town to provide feedback. We're doing our best on this tight schedule to kind of get this material through. But certainly we're happy to, I don't think any of this should be taken as given. I think it's just, as Bernard said, it's an opportunity to discuss and sort of focus. And to your point, what are and aren't we going to do? So I think it's fine for us to revise this, and really make sure it conforms to what the committees or subcommittees are doing.
Yeah, so I think that's fair, Mariah, and I think it's a good idea to discuss it at the subcommittee meeting. I had some feedback on this as well. And so maybe it makes sense as a next step for us to discuss it in the subcommittee meetings. We have one on Monday for schools, so we can tackle it then. And then to get back to you, Chaz, on that, because that way we can have a subcommittee specific, robust discussion on this and then come back with something that we think makes sense.
I think that's great. I would much rather that than try and do this top down.
Thank you. I appreciate that, especially because I've got to run now to my work stuff. So thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Okay, anything else?
This is definitely, so I think, based on this conversation, I think the subcommittees should review this document and, basically come up with their own version of it. This is an opportunity for discussion. It's based off of the 2014 override report, which other committee members and folks who have been involved in this for a while have pointed to as kind of the gold standard of an override report. And so that's, the kinds of questions that were asked and were answered in that document. But with that said, I think that with that document was also produced very much hand in glove with, in terms of what Mariah just said before she left, PSB's work product and PSB's analysis. So I do want to be clear that, this is not, this is, what the kind of the division of roles and responsibilities in terms of where the school committee and select board sit versus where this committee sits. So I think all of that is important to discuss at the subcommittee level.
Yeah, I looked at these and see them as, this is what the public is going to want to know. And, some of the information is going to come from the schools themselves because we can't create it, just as the information comes from the town, we can't create it. But these are the questions, because I expect there will be a lot of pushback to this. Not sure this has been the greatest process. In 2014, it took us forever, so it's hard to compare the two timelines. I would like to see if this happens again, a blending of the working groups, but having more of the information from those working groups available to the public without necessarily going through all the public hearings. That would be my ideal, but hopefully we're not going to have to do this again.
Where are you moving to?
Well, the state is going to respond to, I think, one of the TV channels is doing the state's gotten all this new revenue. Why are the towns and cities in such bad shape? So maybe the state will get the message.
Okay, moving right on. Any further discussion of the outline?
And again, this is more for talking than for doing. I would really, I think the next step here is really for the subcommittees to take a look at this and come up with their own structure for how they want their sections to look.
Yeah, and I would just emphasize that, you know, the community has some questions. And if we don't provide an answer, that a override study committee, for example, not override study committee, and a campaign committee can answer, then we're in deep trouble. So you know, we have to provide that information that can be used in any campaign or that people can read.
One of the things I've been focusing on a lot in the town subcommittee is we really need a clear picture presented of how we got where we are. And not just assume that everybody knows, because the questions are, why are you here again? And so what are the forces in all the different places that are pushing on the budget, so that even though for years and years and years, we've been saying we're spending more than we're taking in, under 2.5, we can't keep blaming 2.5. We need to deal with it, and that's what they want to know.
Okay. But also, I mean, they think of two questions that people should have on their mind that we have to answer. Number one, why did we have an $8+ million gap last year? And number two, what are our answers, or how have we addressed the issues raised in the Clifton Larson Allen report?
Right.
And if we don't answer those, I mean, the idea is that those are problems that haven't been fixed.
Yeah, and that's part of what I mean by how did we get here?
Yeah. Okay.
And how did we respond? Because the getting here, everything that was in that report and that budget gap has been addressed, hopefully by both sides. I know that the schools are working on it very hard. We need to present that.
I think there's in this outline, Chaz, that you have there. I think one thing that is missing is more of a table setting or background section. And I think that gets to some of the points that were just raised between Janet and Bernard as well. And there's some other context around growth of real estate taxes over time, and just some additional context that has been shared in this committee over the last several months, I think would be helpful as background or table setting for the report. You could put it in the appendix, but I do think that a portion of that in the introduction will be important. And that I didn't see that in your outline, which kind of quickly jumps into, do we need an override and what's changed? So I would recommend including that as well.
Yeah, in 2014, it was very obvious what was driving it, which was the super growth in the student population, and that entire override was devoted, as I recall, to the school side, because they hadn't been able to hire, I never know what to call them, not the teachers, but the social workers. No, the social workers.
BCBAs.
Sorry?
BCBAs.
Okay, whatever they are, have been neglected in order to be able to populate classrooms. So that was an obvious thing, and maybe that's why, if you follow that outline, it wasn't obvious to you to put it in here. Now it's not so obvious.
Yeah, that's helpful feedback. The 2014 actually opened with a discussion of how the committee was set up and the structure for it, which I thought it's interesting, it's helpful to, but it was less about why and more about procedure. And I felt like, to the point that you're raising, the public is going to want to have up front, answers to its questions.
Yeah.
Readily identifiable, but I think to Sadat's point, that doesn't mean you should skim on the background. A paragraph or a couple of paragraphs of summary of why are we here is also not just what are we doing.
Right.
Okay, any other?
I was just gonna make just, Bernard, one comment. Somebody said something about the CLA report and how it and sort of how it could, I think maybe you did. I think that there's still, maybe I'll say it from, from the school committee perspective, the other side of that report. And I'm not sure it's been fully shared, I guess, in terms of the claims that were made by the consultant. And although some of them were pretty clear, like someone wasn't trained or something like that, I didn't take a security course or something, that's pretty obvious. But some of the other claims are I think, a little broad. I'm not sure they were, potentially 100% accurate. And I'm not sure that the school side ever really said, yeah, we adopt and agree with every one of those findings. I know now many of the findings in the report, are sort of running smoothly in terms of the IDEA grant, which is a large piece of it, and settlements, payments, processes have all been like super cleaned up. And so at some point it might, I would not want to see us use the CLA report as a way of trying to convince, persuade, or remind people that there were some problems in the past that have been fixed now. I think a lot of that's already been addressed, and we're in a different place now than we were last February, March, April, and May.
I think,
Oh, go ahead, Janet.
I was just gonna say, the point that at least I was trying to make is the schools may be very well aware, but it's something we have to make crystal clear to the voters who maybe saw the report, if they saw it at all in Brookline.news, and then don't know what's happened. So it's important that we address the fact that there had been problems, the big gap, this report, the bad publicity that came out of how it was dropped on the community at large. And yes, we know that the schools have done a lot to address it, but that has to be integral in the report. There were problems. This is where we are now. We've addressed them.
Yeah, I mean, the CLA report are out there as a big store on our town or school system, and if we don't do something or say something about it, people are going to assume the worst.
Yeah, I understand. I don't know, Sadaf, is that something you've discussed within your subcommittee?
I'm sorry, I missed the question. Can you repeat that?
Has the CLA audit report been a subject in your subcommittee in terms of having the opportunity to have Dr. Givens or somebody point by point go through what it said then and where we are now, so that we've got the right, not a perception, the right facts about where we are today in regard to what the report said?
So I actually raised this with Mariah offline and was hoping to have a chat with her about it. I agree with Bernard that I do think we need to address it in the report. It is something that just got a lot of airtime. And I appreciate, Jesse, your point that a ton of work has been done. I actually think that that's a lot of, that is a credibility building narrative that I think should be included in the report, because it was covered quite a bit in the Brookline News and other places. And so people were aware of it. And I think that it would be helpful to include in the report what's been done. So that is what I emailed Mariah about, and it was just waiting to hear back on how best to do it, because obviously that would need to come from the staff in terms of, the things that have been done, and then give people an opportunity to ask questions. So that is an open question for my
Right.
part.
One of the, I guess I could take it offline with Val, but I think one of the direct ways we could do it on the school side would be to sit down with Karen and Susan and look at each of the points here, and then just annotate what, where it was then and where it is now.
Yeah.
So
The school subcommittee has not, Jesse, gone through that report
That's
point by point.
okay.
So,
Go ahead.
Jesse, I think the best thing the school committee could do is to go back to the consultant and have them come in
and evaluate the changes that you have implemented. Because otherwise, you're going to have the folks who were said to be responsible making a presentation and saying how they fixed everything that they were doing. And, I think from the town's perspective, the population's perspective, it might be better to have the folks who, did the research and wrote the report come back and say, yeah, you've cleaned things up.
That's certainly a reasonable approach. I think if I recall, the CLA report was funded by the town, so the town would have to agree to bring them back in if we were to go that route.
So I think it's more a question I think it's more a question of credibility for the school committee and the school department. And so maybe that's an investment you might want to make.
I see where you're going. Okay.
Jesse,
Sure.
we paid them to come back for us, so we can do that again.
Oh, great.
And by the way, I think Chad put out a memo around around time the report came out that addressed the things that had been accomplished or had been fixed that had been identified by the report. So
That's stale now. I think they've done a lot more even since then, which I think is really important to highlight.
the point is, that information is out there and we just have to update it.
Yeah, but I think to Jesse's point too, I think there are areas where the school committee has identified, because of the speed at which the report was completed and the breadth of it, there were, assumptions made that, here's a singular problem. The problem is generalized across the PSB, and that turned out with additional investigation not to be true. It was a singular issue as opposed to a systemic issue. And I think by the time that I was trying to write the initial summary to TSP, we didn't have that information in front of us. And so I want to be, I don't want my draft of that to be used against the schools because that's not fair to them.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, anything else? Do the subcommittees have marching orders with respect to the outline?
We do.
Meaning, change it, revise it, or whatever. I take it
Well,
that is a yes.
I've got a question that's come up and maybe worth a moment of discussion here. Speaking for the future subcommittee, I think everyone knows that there were about 5 items that were PSB related, which happened to have wound up in the futures, but which in fact may belong better in the school. So in the last conversation, I think Sadaf and Jesse and I thought that perhaps the way this should work is that PSB matters would begin from the school subcommittee, and only to the extent that they felt there were elements that needed to be thought about in the future or were outside of the time frame of a potential override, that those would then in fact be picked up in the futures subcommittee. So I wanted to air that for the whole committee and see whether that was a reasonable or a consistent way of approaching it.
Are there specific issues, Sergio? You're
Let me just say it at the schools subcommittee meeting today. Prior to this meeting, let me pick one example. We discussed the subject of a middle school reorganization as opposed to the K-8 system. And that I think has formally resided in the futures subcommittee, but Sadaf raised the question of whether we should be looking at that. It is not something that is going to get resolved and should not be, nobody should suggest that that is going to be an answer or anything that will be resolved in the time frame of this override. But it is something that is on the table and really should not be dropped at this point.
So you're, I think, concurring, Dick, that somehow the problem gets segmented there's a short-term issue that could be addressed by the PSB group, which is the equity of how the middle school education model is working currently. And I think until that gets resolved, there's no opportunity to look at the bigger overall educational model. So the overall model question probably does reside properly at Futures. Is that what I'm hearing?
That was not my understanding. So that, I mean, my understanding was that the issue is something that we can certainly initiate from the school side, not in the context of this override, with any expectation that it will affect this override.
That's right. So I had a similar understanding. I think we were going to just logistically manage it within the school subcommittee and stay plugged into Futures. I think it is relevant to talk about things that will be tackled in the future and potential options to think about different cost structures, which is why I think it's relevant here. And I think that is something that I think would be important to voters.
Agreed. So, but another example of this was space utilization.
Yes.
Cliff was trying to work on that. It wasn't clear, again, how that was going to work, or revenue enhancement that was related to space utilization, or leveling of classroom sizes. I'm just trying to confirm then that I'm relying upon Cliff and Sadaf to essentially parse out those things that belong in their report. And as members of the future subcommittee will then include a piece which will become part of the futures report.
Yeah, I think that's right. So just going back to the middle school model example, I think, that is something that I'm working on and I'm responsible for. And then to the extent that it is a longer term undertaking, which inevitably it will be,
Right.
it just end up in the future section of the report, even though I'm writing it and might get updates in the school section. So,
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that all of the committee was aware that there were these sort of subtle questions that we're trying to figure out as to how best. In the end, it's one report, even though it's being generated by these three subcommittees, and how to make that happen in an appropriate way so that the short-term items can be identified now and the longer-term items don't get lost.
yeah. And I think once we get a solid outline in place, and if each subcommittee wants to refine their sections for the outline, and we have a solid outline, then I think we're just in a better place so people can start adding their pieces in. I think what's missing is the overarching, right? There's the overarching punchline, right? The recommendation. So that feels like a necessary step before we start filling in some of the other pieces. And there's a level of iteration inevitably that will happen. And I'm trying to just think through how we'll do that within the timeline.
So then that raises to me the second question, which is again procedural, which is that each of the subcommittees presumably are creating a set of recommendations as subcommittees, which are then going to come before the whole committee for acceptance and incorporation, at which point a final report can be written. Is that how we're thinking about this?
That is my working assumption. I think other people are nodding their heads. I think what's not in the document, Chaz, that you shared was the timeline for when we would do that. There's some of the big milestones around when we need to have the ballot question in place, when we would need to go to select board, but a milestone or meetings that we should target to converge as a full committee to agree on what the full recommendations are is not in there, but I think it would be helpful to add that just so everyone is tracking to the same dates.
I can definitely build that out. I tried to keep it high level in terms of the individual sections of the report, basically saying, now is probably a pretty good time for the future subcommittee to start getting that work off the ground. And in fact, in some cases, Bernard, for example, your memo, Sergio, some of the discussions that you and Vikram and Alexandra have put together about solar power, all of that, it can start to be consolidated as sections of the report when it comes to these recommendations. The way I see that division between the school section and the future section is what's something that's on a longer time horizon? What's something that's deeply structural that we're not going to resolve as part of this override cycle necessarily, but that is something that the town really needs to take a hard look at. And, you know, so I think in Bernard's case, talking about commercial development, and in your case, talking about, you know, fuel efficiency, power efficiency, and energy independence. All of that stuff is appropriate. And I think there's enough material available to us now to start that writing work in, you know, December. And then as we get more information from the town and the school side, we can start to fill in those gaps.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
In the 2014 report, we did what Sergio said. We had a ton more subcommittees. We reported out to the whole, and then each subcommittee wrote its own report. And then since we were fairly divided, we had a very hectic time of each side drafting their full report. But what was also included from every subcommittee were recommendations for either further work or things that they thought, although outside the timeline, maybe not as detailed as what BFAC did, where they actually said, this is what you're going to do in the next whatever months. But certainly this is best practice we should adhere to. There was a lot of lip service given to something that they weren't able to actually affect, which was keeping a lid on salary increases, because that's certainly not within the purview of just one side when you're doing contract negotiations, but certainly room for that in each of the reports. This is sort of a finding section, if you will, of ways to improve the practice.
Sergio?
And then the full committee voted on each subcommittee's
Yes.
submission.
So that, I think Cliff has actually really put his finger on part of what I was trying to figure out. If each subcommittee comes up with a set of recommendations, which the subcommittee approves, is there an implication that there are then 3 separate meetings of the full committee, each one dedicated to hearing from each subcommittee, hearing the recommendations, and then voting to accept or not accept that report?
So Sergio, back in 2014, 2015, I do not think we had 10 separate meetings or 8 separate meetings. I think we tried to do it all in one meeting, and I don't see why we wouldn't be able to do that here. Maybe we could, maybe we couldn't, I don't know. Dick, you're
Okay,
smiling.
but
No, I'm thinking that particularly given the timeline this year, a profusion of meetings is probably not realistic.
Yeah, my recollection is we had more than one meeting, but it was because we had so many subcommittees, but it wasn't one meeting per subcommittee report.
Right. But there's an agreement that somehow there are 1 or 2 of the full committee meetings where the subcommittees are going to present, there's discussion on the recommendation, they get voted up or down. Is that
Right, and then the select board can ignore it.
So, but that's true whether we write up something or don't.
So the possibility, and I don't know if this was override reports, is in some of the where do we put a school reports, there's room for dissent. So if people on the committee feel strongly that they can't buy into the majority view, or as in our case in 2014, almost a completely divided report.
Yeah.
I would just urge everyone to acknowledge Shakespeare. Brevity is the soul of wit. We sort of went overboard in 2014, and that means no one reads it. So.
And remember, the first group of people that have to read it is the select board. You have to convince the select board first to put something on the ballot. And then the report should be written so that the voters are convinced also, before the campaign committee is able to use it to convince the voters.
So we need to build in.
But that's what the executive summary is for, right? I mean, there's a lot of work that we worked for a year and a half, right? Something like that. And there was a lot of detail. It was very thorough. We hired some outside folks. It was great. But the executive summary, you know, which was not short, but it did, pull together all the relevant pieces from everything else.
We,
And I think that's the way you end up going.
so in
And
having, sorry, to build
I'm
in
sorry.
meetings for review of the subcommittee reports, we need a public hearing built in somewhere too.
That's right.
And certainly, as nothing precludes a majority and a minority report if there is a sharply divided opinion.
Yeah. Although where possible, I would strongly encourage we try and reach consensus.
Yes, it's not always possible in Brookline.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there will be a minority report in the community, no matter what we say. So anyway, Sergio?
I just wanted to get a clarification. You mentioned the notion of public hearings. Can you just help us better understand, is that at the subcommittee level or at the full committee level, or at what level does that happen?
Should be the full committee level. Hearings for every subcommittee just makes this an impossible task.
Yeah, and the public is invited, not that we've had a whole bunch of people, although Carla's pretty much here all the time. Thank you, Carla. Yeah, I mean, I don't understand why it's gotten so little traction. I don't remember if we had a lot of people coming to our subcommittee meetings. It depended on the meeting back in 2014, but a lot of what I remember of that public subcommittee was hearing from, because we talked about the METCO program, METCO parents, hearing from union staff, because the idea of 3-person manning on fire engines is certainly not new. I don't remember a lot of people coming forward and just saying, this is a great idea, or I will or won't vote for an override. They were more looking at some of those pieces.
I guess I'm still not clear. This public hearing is some requirement, I gather. But I'm not clear at how or at what point it's taking place. Is this prior to the full committee having accepted the subcommittee recommendations?
I think so. Generally, what happens at the select board level, which is a process I think you might want to consider following here, is that for items that the select board particularly wants input on and knows are likely to generate discussion, they notice a public hearing in advance. There's a presentation that's made, and then there's an opportunity for the public to speak on the topics that were raised at the presentation. So what we would probably envision here is the subcommittee is reporting out. As part of that reporting out, there would be an opportunity not just for the committee to respond, the committee as a whole to respond, public to respond, either at that meeting or at a subsequent meeting. And then subsequent to that, with all of that information in hand, with all the recommendations done, the subcommittees can finalize their work with that input, include whatever of that input they think is appropriate in their draft report, and bring it back to the committee as a whole. So when you play out a timeline there, that's probably work that those presentations need to start being made to the full committee in late January, early February, so that you have kind of a 3-week runway. So, January basically is the time for the subcommittees to really start now into January, it's really time for the subcommittees to start transforming their opinions, their knowledge of the subject into, sections of the report, and then for that work to come before the full committee for a public hearing in late January, early February.
Okay, anything else?
I got one more follow-up. This back to you, Chaz. In the futures subcommittee that we held just before this one, I mentioned that you had made the recommendation on the solar initiative, that perhaps the model to be followed was one in which the ZAB sustainability director would be putting together a package of achievable goals and asking for funding for a consultant who would then vet the proposed sites. and that they might want to do that by coming before the select board. And it seemed like you might be suggesting that that was going to happen in your mind soon rather than later. Did I correctly understand that, or what guidance you were offering?
I think my guidance there was more on the sense of that should be done as part of the broader climate action and resiliency plan, right? That once that document is finalized in the spring, and we have this 10-year road that presumably this work is part of, that at that, the team gets that information before the select board and says, hey, this is, in order for this to get moving, this is what we want. This is what where we think you should go. This is why it's a priority. Things like that. So that I don't necessarily think that needs to be. I don't think, like, for example, the scope of the consultant's work is something that should be a concern to this committee. I just don't think you have the time. I think it's more in broad strokes, right? That as a recommendation that as part of the climate action resiliency plan, the community consider opportunities for energy independence and thus, reduction in expenditure, as well as contributing to the green of the community, the fossil fuel free nature of the community. Those sorts of recommendations then become the impetus to say in the CARP, well, we've got this recommendation. It not only drives down our fossil fuels, it actually is cheaper for us in the long run. So it's doubly important. And then from there, talking to the select board about how that is implemented in practice. Does that make sense?
I get it. So the point you're making here is that you're really putting this as part of the CARP program, not asking that it be broken out separately because of the economic investment opportunity.
I think, yes, well, yes, and, yes, and, right? It's a yes, this should be part of the CARP so that the select board understands the prioritization, because in the CARP, you're also presumably going to talk about building efficiency in Alberta, which is another thing that CF has been discussing quite a bit. You're going to be talking about stormwater resiliency. You're going to be talking about a lot of different topics, and the board is really going to need CF's guidance on where do we go first. And so the CARP is going to be the document that helps provide that, and then being able to talk about solar in the context of both economics and the town's broader climate goals is going to be crucial.
Sadat?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify, Chaz, given this revised timeline, what are you expecting to take to the select board in December? Given that the work for the schools won't be done till later, sort of the January, February timeline, it would be helpful for me to understand that. I don't think we have a meeting on the calendar for the full committee yet in December, which I think we talked about would be scheduled. So I'd like to understand what's going to the select board in December, and then when we would have an opportunity to actually hear from the public, which is a conversation I know we've had a couple of times, but with everything shifting around, I want to make sure that we give people time to respond.
Yeah. So on December, so assuming as going forward, we get the information from the schools on December 4th, the school goes before the school committee. That information will feed into our forecast, which we will present to the select board on December 9th. And that will include, here's where the schools are, here's where the town is. For the town side, at least, we will be talking about override and no override scenarios. What happens? What is the town asking for? What will happen if the town doesn't get it? That will be the select board's kind of inaugural opportunity to start pressure testing itself, the town's presumptions, the town's analysis, and it can hopefully inform the town subcommittee on, where the select board's areas of concern are. Although I think they're pretty, congruous with what we've been hearing out of the town subcommittee, personnel, number of personnel, service, unfunded mandates, whether or not we're keeping pace with comparable communities in terms of pay scales. I think all of that is on the select board's mind just as much as it is the subcommittee's mind. On the school side, we're going to have the school's numbers, but to the point made earlier, it's not really our purview to talk about what's going on there, right? The decisions that the schools are making. It's going to be much more of a, and it's going to be much more of a, we know where the schools are now. We have a better sense of where they think they're going to wind up and what that number is, the gap between revenue and projected expenditure with efficiencies and included in the analysis. So again, that kind of forms the contour of what a potential school override ask is. And then, the town kind of the discussion on the town side will operate in that context. We know that the school's number is likely to be around X. It's possible that number could go down, it's possible that number could go up, but we know the ballpark of where it's at. Given that, what is does it make sense for the town's number to be Y? What is that combined? How are voters going to respond to that? What are voters, what are the expectations? What are the big questions going to be? Those conversations at the select board level are going to happen, but they're going to be focused on the town side.
That's helpful. That's helpful. I guess I just wanted to also clarify. I mean, given that the schools will have shared their multi-year forecast just a week or so before, will you have enough information to say that we think this is the size of the override? Will you've agreed on with Bella?
So I haven't formally, and I want to be very certain on this because I don't want to get out ahead of Bella on any of this stuff.
Of course. And I realize she's not there. I know Val's here, but may not.
And stuff like this outline, right? Like we're throwing stuff back and forth, and I think both of us are trying our best to balance the competing needs of our constituencies, the competing asks of our constituencies. I think it will give us a ballpark figure on where this is. I don't want to commit Bella to a number there.
Of course, and that's kind of where I'm going, which is that I just want to make sure that I mean, obviously you know what you're doing, but it seemed that given that the schools will just have shared that forecast, if you're sharing that this might be the size of the override, I just didn't think that everybody was there yet. So
I want to try to be very clear that we're operating as best we can under these circumstances, but the focus on the 9th is really going to be on the town side.
So that makes sense to me. I just think there's more to be done, and I would assume that the schools would agree with that. So I just wanted to point that out.
I also think another aspect of this that we need to be clear on is that some of the decisions that would be made at the select board level, like for example, raising parking violation fees, or reducing the amount of revenue finance CIP that we put together, the revenue finance portion of the CIP, those numbers flow through the split. And so that money, some of that, 60% of that money comes back to the schools. And right now, the schools are not putting that into their assumptions. And so we need to be very clear them that decisions that we're recommending the select board make may well have a practical impact on the school's bottom line in a positive direction. In the sense that, on our end, reducing the revenue finance CIP down to 6%, 6.6 yields, around $800,000. On the school side, that's more than $1 million. And that goes a long way. So we're looking at it in that from that perspective.
Jess, can I take us back a little bit?
Yeah.
On your outline, you have what was the work of the town school partnership. I forget what we called ourselves, committee under futures.
Yes.
And we had sort of a report. I just want to make sure that went to Sergio, and that's what he's including in what he's doing, but also how that impacts, because is this something that, we've talked about changing some of the above the line, below the line things. Do you envision that recommendation would be part of the split that goes forward for 2027?
I think realistically, that work needs to be completed as part of the town school partnership. But I think a recommendation to the town school partnership that that work be completed, which is, the most obvious one being healthcare and the split. But that's ultimately a TSP decision. It's a decision that has to be made with the school committee, the advisory committee, and the select board all on the same page. And so I
Okay.
think recommending that as part of the recommendations, taking a hard look at that, and, both that and shared services without necessarily doing that deep dive into shared services should be X, your model above the line, below the line should be Y, just talking a bit about what we saw and where the opportunities are, rather than making hard recommendations.
And did you ever share the memo you shared with that subcommittee with everyone else?
Yes.
Because I don't remember, well, I've seen it so many times, I don't remember where I saw it. So everyone has that, and that would be part of Sergio's recommendation that, this work was completed and it would just be in his report.
Yeah, and Sergio, I can follow up with you on that as well, but yes, it was circulated to the full committee, I believe in September as part of one of the broader conversations. Charlie and Nicole have been working a lot on updating the website to make clear where all the various documents that have been presented over time are, indexing them and making it easy to access.
Yeah,
So
I've seen it. It's nice, good. I see you already reacted to a suggestion I made of what you sent to us, so thank you very much.
And I
So,
certainly would ask for clarification on whatever this memo that is being referred to, because I'm not sure I actually understand which one you mean. So please just send it along when you have. Thank you.
so Chaz, and Sadaf, just to understand, the school committee is getting a projection of a potential ask on December 4th. Then I understood that potential efficiencies and reductions the following week would go to, I know the school committee wants to hear it before it goes to other committees. So that would be December 11th, if I understand correctly.
So my understanding was that December 4th information, that December 4th forecast would include their efficiencies and restoration and other things. And then on the 9th, we would ask questions and continue to
Yeah.
the work that our
Okay,
subcommittee is supposed to do. I don't think that there's a plan for a second iteration of that prior to having a conversation about it. My understanding was that as they build out the forecast in a more detailed way, because I think everyone saw the bottom line number, which is only level service, that Bella and her team will consider both the restoration as well as efficiencies in order to come up with a package that is rational. That is my understanding. And
okay, I have in my notes a reference to potential efficiencies and reductions the following week.
Okay.
And
But we don't, just to let you know, Dick, we don't have the meeting that week. It's 2 weeks later, the 18th.
okay, so I'm concerned. I may have mentioned earlier the meeting that our subcommittee had earlier today. It was earlier this week, but I'm pessimistic about when the information is going to be forthcoming, but I had understood a more extended iterative process happening.
yeah, I think
so
it's
we'll
worth,
see.
yeah, I think it's worth clarifying, and we don't have Mariah, and I'm not
We'll
sure
see.
if Val can answer that
we'll see.
question. And but Cliff, you're there as well, and Jesse, you might.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was gonna ask Jesse or Val about, the level service is what I thought we're getting first.
Which you got
And-
last week or 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so what is gonna happen on the 4th that's going to be different than the level service?
There'll be
What are
some
the-
information on efficiencies, on ads, some ads, and sort of just a bit more information on, as Sadaf said, what the contours might look like going forward.
So when you say, ads, is that restoration? Is it new programs? Is it both?
I don't know, Cliff. I haven't seen it either. The leadership team is putting that together with their professional expertise on what they think they need.
Val, are you expecting anything further after December 4th in terms of iterations, further information?
Yes, our budget
Refinement.
process is always an iterative process, so I think after the December 4th meeting, it'll be iterative until it gets to that line item level in the February timeframe.
Okay, any further discussion or meeting?
I guess I have one other question about process, and it really relates to the normal budget process where budget comes out in February. There is, an understanding of what revenue is, and to the extent that there are gaps, then there's working on trying to close gaps. And I'm wondering how that normal process is going to fit in with a process where people are starting with an ask and, whatever the deficits are on either side, and how this committee, to the extent it is going to even be responsible for this, talks about whether or not that is too much of an ask, which is what would happen typically in the spring in terms of the back and forth between the town and the school. So whether it's the schools asking too much or the town asking too much or everyone asking too much, where is the conversation about true capacity to pay? And I personally am not very sanguine about the information that's going to come out from this survey that hasn't started and may not, be representative ultimately of the broadest scope of the town population.
So I think on this, it is from a practical standpoint. When you think about it, when there's no override contemplated, then what happens is we run the numbers. We have a sense of where the projected revenue is. Those numbers are continually revised as we discuss with the advisor on the town side with the advisory committee and the schools as well. Where we are, where we think we are, what the gap is, and how we're going to potentially close it. These days we rely on the House Ways and Means budget usually as the budget that we rely on in terms of state aid for the initial draft of the local budget, because the number between that, the change between that and the governor's budget typically isn't that big. And we can account for that if necessary in the fall with the budget revision. In that regard, there is a conversation that goes back and forth, which is your number is X, and you are either below that number, which hasn't happened in a while, or you're above that number, which has happened the last 2 years. Your expenditures outstrip your revenues. What are you going to do about it? And in those cases, on the town side, we have that conversation with the select board and with advisory. And I think in this instance, right, that conversation is playing out in the context of this committee in the sense of, is that something we go to the voters for? Or is it something we solve some other way? Again, it's not necessarily we're not asking the committee to direct the operations of the town or the schools, but we are asking whether or not is this something that is going to be an appropriate topic for an override? Is something that needs to be put on the ballot? That's the kind of process I envision the committee playing as part of this. And in a lot of ways, on the town side, that's already happening. I produce pretty much every time the town subcommittee meets a revised version of the document that reflects where I think the revenue gap is and what I think we would need to cover if we were to go to the voters, what I would recommend covering as part of that ask. And then we continue to, have discussions about, what are alternative ways to achieve that? How can you test whether or not this is, appropriate under the circumstances? Are there other things out there that that are taking away from the core mission of the town? And I think just as on the school side, being able to, combat that perception that there's fat in the budget, is, really important. And so that's the kind of process that I envision happening here, a conversation.
So I've got two other related questions. The first is, to the extent that a dollar amount gets thought of, okay, or a percentage of, the current levy, operating levy, not debt exclusion levy, says it is used as sort of a proxy for how much money is going to be asked for, to the extent people are asking for money. Is there any thought as to whether or not that dollar amount gets split the way money goes through the town school partnership, or are we treating the asks from the town and the schools completely separate, and doesn't really matter that we have a town school partnership split?
So in the 23 override, we certainly framed it that way. We framed it as the 60-40 split. I think at this juncture, based on what we're seeing in terms of the discrepancy in expenditure increases, it may not be as appropriate to flag it this way. The pressures on the schools and the town are different, and they're impacted in different ways. I'm certainly happy to have that conversation, but I don't necessarily think in this circumstance that I want to yoke the schools to the town or vice versa in this way. I think the town's number is, I think the kind of end goal here would be maybe to hold the town harmless in the event that the town, there's less than a 60-40 split. Which is to say that, all right, if we're going to do this in such a way that departs from the revenue model, then we're not going to have situations like we've had in the past couple of years where there have been budget amendments proposed to take money away from the town and give to the schools. There's got to be something. There's got to be some kind of recommendation there.
So thank you. With regard, just for my own edification, so I met with someone yesterday, Chaz, I wrote you a note about this, who wants to discuss the usage of fields and buildings for athletics as a revenue producing opportunity. And I guess one question I have is, right now, got the rec department that raises money from athletics. Sometimes they're using school buildings to do that. And we've got the schools who are raising money, I believe, in certain circumstances. To the extent that we look at trying to maximize that sort of revenue, is that something that ultimately flows through or could flow through the general fund? Or would it have to go to, the individual components, or does it have to go through into a, revolving funds? What's the guidelines for stuff like that?
It can you get pretty complex pretty fast depending on what you're talking about.
So we should talk about it offline. Let's talk about it offline.
Yes, okay. I mean, I will say this. That subject is one that I really remains a high priority for me to discuss with the schools. We've been sitting on a broader rec schools integration MOU for some time, and we got to get moving on that.
Okay, so we'll talk about this offline then, because I think you gotta follow up with this guy. And so back to one other thing, which is capacity to pay. Yeah, you know, all the other override study committees have had pretty robust analyses that look into that issue. And I just don't want us to forget about that because it certainly would factor into my thinking.
That is a good flag. Thank you.
Lincoln, did you still have your hand up?
He's also.
No, that's okay. I was going to partially answer Cliff's question, but I think maybe better to talk offline, as Chad said.
Okay.
And actually, just to clarify that this capacity to pay, this was originally on the list to be tackled by the town subcommittee, but it sounds like the Kennedy School students are actually doing that. Is it covered? It's unclear to me from this conversation if it somehow got dropped or not. Cliff, you're implying that your statement.
Well, I'm just not. Of course, I don't want to prejudge because I haven't been there to talk to them about it. I don't know if they've seen the prior reports. I mean, you know, the one back in 2014, you know, was fantastic. The one in 2017 was pretty good. But, you know, I'm a little nervous when I hear about a survey that already is not getting much traction in the community, where you might end up with, you know, not a representative sample in terms of both its size as well as its breadth. And there's a lot of other information that should go into an analysis like that. And I just don't want us to
not have that data. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I agree. So Chaz, I think you were saying something. I think this is an important point, and I just want to make sure we're clear on what the plan is to ensure that we have this data for the purposes of the report. Because I agree with you, Cliff, and I had thought it was being tackled, and I just want to make sure that everybody feels that we have a plan for it.
Cliff, do you think using the model that was in the 2014 report would be a good starting point?
Well, so, you know, I can tell you that one of the things I've thought about, and I kicked myself for actually not having started it back in the summer, is, you know, there are a lot of statistics there, and those statistics probably can be easily updated. You know, it wasn't a model; it was really research and bringing in information that, you know, looks at Brookline and its income distribution and you know its tax rates, and it tries to put the burden that the people have here relative to other communities in the area. It actually was pretty surprising data. I think that can be easily updated because it's just a little bit of research, and then, you know, if I had a Word document, I probably do have a Word document. I could probably weave it into a lot of the same narrative. I'm not necessarily truly raising my hand to do that, but if I had to, I certainly would participate.
I had early on provided a couple of graphs that showed the impact on taxpayers in Brookline relative to other communities over the last, I don't know, 5-10 years. I can't even recall what the time frame was at this point, but that sort of information, as you note, Cliff, is available. It is out there.
And I had asked, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'll tell you, I've got a suggestion because we could talk a lot about this. Why don't I go back to like the 2014 report, pull out that section, and you know, either circulate it to everybody or maybe just a couple of folks here who might be willing to work on it with me. And if we don't have a quorum, then we don't have to worry about it. So if anyone is interested / willing, put your name, just send me an email and I'll get you the information.
I was just gonna say, I'm gonna ask Melissa, and she promised it to us, by the fourth for the, historical data of what our overrides have been as separate from the, debt exclusions and who benefited from them and, what a projected increase in rate, I don't know if it's 8% increase or what a dollar amount would equate to in a projected increase in the rate. So hopefully we'll have some of that might help you update whatever you're looking at.
So Jesse, this is not being tackled in the town subcommittee? You guys didn't opt to pull this in to your list of things?
It is not on our current list, no.
It's data that we've asked for.
Yeah, Janet has a
I
list of,
shared it with the whole committee.
it was
so-
shared last week, but never gotten to in the agenda. It was the it was the Gelbart data request.
Yeah.
So
I
I did have it in our agenda yesterday, and we did go through them, and Janet updated us, and she's asked various sources for the data. So yeah, I guess from that point of view, set off when we get it's been asked for quite a while, so when we get it, yeah, we could continue to keep that within the town subcommittee for now.
So I just said that the data that Janet just mentioned is less about capacity to pay than
Right.
it is about the impact of a number on, you know, your taxes. It doesn't really get to the issue of capacity to pay. So it's a different analysis.
Yeah, but we need them both.
No, I agree. No, don't, I was not saying.
Your suggestion of a working group is probably a good one under these circumstances, because you're right, they're not the same question. The better news for you is that it's much easier to get the comparators data. I'm reading the 2014 capacity to pay report right now. It's much easier to get this data than it was in 2014. This is all readily available from DLS, so you can actually run comparisons on their website to produce the kind of reports that you've got in the tables here. So it is far less a lift to produce the data, but synthesizing it in the way this does, which I agree, it's comprehensive, and it's great in looking at it from different angles. You know, what is the burden on renters? What is the burden, how is the composition of the town changed over time? How many people are burdened in terms of the percentage that they pay in taxes? You know, all of that is really is critical insight when it comes to capacity to pay. And that is information that we can pull fairly readily from the state's database.
Yeah, the author did a good job. I'm looking at Dick. I'm looking at Dick. Dick was the.
Was Dick the author? Well, it seems like the author's agreeing to rewrite it for this time.
Okay, so we can do that offline. It's 3:00. It's time for the meeting to end, unless I see Jesse has his hand up.
No, that was that I had to drop. Yeah, thank you. Yep, you're thinking along my lines here, Bernard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Mike, and if you could give me a quick call, I'd appreciate it.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Yes.
Thank
that's-
you.